Major funding for Carolina Business Review is provided by Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle-market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health, including Presbyterian in Charlotte and Forsyth in Winston-Salem, are affiliate heart hospitals of the Cleveland Clinic, consistently ranked #1 in the nation for heart care. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, proudly serving South Carolinians since 1946. And by Sonoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
The choir has left the one-room schoolhouse and is creating sound waves along a global network. We have new remixes of old songs, yet the chorus repeats. More is needed from our educational institutions. The key hasn't changed. The issue is economics, and the question becomes, which record label will step up and fund the new album? Welcome, and thank you for tuning in to the most widely watched program on Carolina business and public policy. I'm Dr. Cheryl Richards, filling in for Chris William, and today's conversation is one from the collective hymnal books. The style and genre may have changed, but the melody remains the same. Education is a driver for economic vitality and sustainability, and communities rely on the outputs for much more than just the bottom line. For today's education leaders, their scope and responsibility is just as much about what happens within their campus walls as what happens outside of them. Later, we'll talk with Dr. Ron Carter, president of Johnson C. Smith University, about his thoughts on the walls we see and those we may not.
Major funding also by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review was recorded March 8, 2013. On this week's program, Dr. Scott Baier of Clemson University, James Sansom of Mechanics and Farmers Bank, and special guest, Dr. Ron Carter, president of Johnson C. Smith University.
Welcome, Scott. Welcome, James. Thank you for joining our program today. So, some completely unexpected news this morning. Jobless rates have gone down, and the numbers are greater than we expected. Let's start talking about this. Do we think we're on the road to recovery, with this being the last piece of the tail that's coming up? Scott?
Yes. Yeah, these numbers were something to actually be excited about. The expectations were that between 150 and 175,000 jobs would be added, and we completely blew past that number this time, adding 236,000 jobs, 247,000 private sector jobs. And the job growth was pretty broad-based in the sense we added jobs in business, finance, healthcare, and in construction, some of the areas that were really impacted by the recession. It's a little too early yet to judge that we're out of it and job growth is going to be robust for the rest of the year, but I think this is a good sign. I think there are plenty of tailwinds behind the economy right now.
And James, interest rates remain low. Is that good for the economy?
Oh, that's excellent. I think we've seen interest rates at, again, all-time lows. You know, where mortgage rates, 30-year mortgage rates are in the 3% range, 15-year mortgages in the 2% range. So it bodes very well and sets the playing field, you know, for a lot of opportunities in terms of, again, getting our economic growth churning the way we need it to churn.
So before we start bringing out the pom-poms and the rah-rah, we're on our way to recovery, we have this thing called sequester that is kind of looming in the background. So what's the urgency of the sequestration talks at this point? When are people going to start feeling the effects of things if we don't kind of rein this in?
Yeah, my opinion is the effects in terms of the overall macroeconomy. I don't think the sequester is going to have as big as an impact as some experts project. It is $85 billion, which, to again put it in perspective, is about the 10th of the size of what the original stimulus package is. So if you think this is a multiplier in reverse, a negative multiplier, it would be about the 10th of the size of the other effect of the stimulus. And in addition, there's not as much slack in the economy as there was when we initially had the stimulus package, which did create a boost. That said, though, I think there are going to be other areas, services and things that may be impacted. But for the macroeconomy in general, I only think that it'll take off like 0.3% of GDP growth. I'm not as concerned as other people are.
You know, there's a segment of the economy that's still hurting, you know, very badly. And I just hope it doesn't continue to have an impact to make the situation worse. I think all of us are somewhat have to be very cautious, you know, going forward, as we have been the last years has told us. We really have to be cautiously optimistic that it doesn't impede and again, injure those who are, again, in a tough position already.
And I think one of the other issues that I'm concerned about with the sequester is it creates uncertainty for state and local governments in terms of we were planning on getting funds, national funds. Now we don't know if we're going to get them. So maybe some of the big investment projects that they were planning that would have helped some of the people who were hurt hardest by the recession, they may not receive the funds necessary for that.
So let's look at the glass half full and some other announcements that have happened in the Carolinas over the last week. We have the largest announcement of new jobs coming in our history here. Single largest job announcement in the state's history from MetLife, bringing 2,600 jobs, both to the Cary, Raleigh area and Charlotte area. We've had the lowest job rate now in 4 years. So let's talk about economic growth and bringing jobs in and how the federal government can impede those or help us in that trajectory.
Well, I think the Carolinas are going to be, over the next 10 years to 20 years, a place where people will migrate to. This is where job growth is going to occur. Anecdotal evidence, just from looking around, I see new homes starting up, airports are busy, new businesses being constructed. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence that the economy here is doing well. Again, I worry about the gridlock, creating the uncertainty that stops the job growth, that stops the traction that we have, and stops us cold.
You talk about bringing new jobs into the area, which we hope brings new investors, new businesses, small businesses. So, James, let's talk about the lending opportunities that come with that. And then let's throw some legislation on there, and let's talk Dodd-Frank while we're at it. So let's talk, how does that impact a bank like M&F as you're looking to lend to new businesses and consumers?
Well, sometimes we say it's a catch-22. We have a lot of enthusiasm to want to lend, but again, you still have the credit quality is still king, and we have to make sure we still are underwriting good quality loans. What we try to do is take a individual or corporation situation and evaluate, what are the problems. Is it more a plan that we should have versus a loan at this juncture, in the cycle? So we really try to have those hard discussions in order to make sure we set them up for the best success down the road. Dodd-Frank, of course, about 1/3 of that legislation has already been acted and had some impact on community banks and our banking system as a whole. But that is a 23-page document, so we know there's much more to come. We just got to brace ourselves and be prepared. And again, have the systems in place to do the correct monitoring that is essential for the benefit of the public.
And let's talk about the systems in place, because you're a bank with a long history, and yet I know your CEO talks about we can't rest on our laurels necessarily. We wouldn't expect someone to come to us just because we had a great history in the past. We have to help them think about the future. So, what do you think is important in lending as we look toward the future? How do you predict that?
Well, I think, as you said, the M&F Bank has an outstanding legacy of success, and we always pride ourselves with consistent profitability since the day we were open. But to me, the most important aspect of that is that we wouldn't have had that profitability unless we hadn't been good to our communities. The communities are the backbone of what we do, and if we treat the community well, in turn, therefore, the benefit is the profitability.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen both. As you know, Dr. Ron Carter will be coming up as our guest, and I'd be asking you to think about some questions that are looming in your mind as we bring him on, particularly around how that impacts maybe federal student loans and those topics. So thank you both for being here. Next week, our special guest is Charlotte Mayor Anthony Foxx. There's a lot going on with intergovernmental relationships across the Carolinas and in Washington. So we hope you will tune in next week for Mayor Foxx's perspective. Let's turn now to our special guest, Dr. Ron Carter, president of Johnson C. Smith University, someone who knows the education landscape in North and South Carolina, and a highly respected community leader. Dr. Carter, welcome.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. I'm delighted to be here with you and Scott and James on the Carolina Business Review.
We have been having a lively conversation in the first segment here around sequestration and its impact to businesses, banks, consumers. So from your perspective, what does this mean for higher education?
This means a very serious, possibly negative impact on higher education. I have just come from a meeting of the United Negro College Fund where the member institutions met to discuss issues that are challenging higher education, and particularly historically black colleges and universities. We are very concerned that if there are any cuts that impact on scholarship opportunities or grant opportunities or loan opportunities for our students, we will see our students losing out of their dreams and aspirations. Now, let me give you an example. Last August, we all faced the surprise in the change of the criteria for the Parent Plus loan. Year before last, it was just a credit score for parents. This year, credit score plus credit history. We have to understand the population. We have to understand these parents. That alone knocked out over 6,000 students from institutions of higher education. Now, when we talk about all of the job opportunities coming to the Carolinas, we also have to ask, now, where will the educated workforce come from? Mm-hmm. So we need to be careful about this.
Well, and it's truly an economic issue, is it not?
Indeed it is. It is truly an economic issue. Absolutely.
And, you know, there's now reports in the Chronicle of Higher Education talking about the cost of a college degree that has gotten well out of hand. And so you're talking about a combination of restrictions on loans. So, James, you know, let me ask you, maybe you have some questions for Dr. Carter as well. You know, how do we connect our educational institutions and our businesses and our banks to kind of figure out the magic formula?
Well, I think Johnson C. Smith has an excellent history of their collaborative efforts with the small business community. And much like Mechanics and Farmers Bank, we have a legacy of history to speak of. But it's very important for us to continue to develop these entrepreneurs and make sure they have the correct skills that give them the best leg up for when they enter into the job market. That's been our primary focus. And again, when it comes to the parents, we try to make sure their house is in order when it comes to credit.
And so how do you direct that question to Dr. Carter?
Well, I guess the biggest thing from an education standpoint that we talk about is financial literacy.
Yes.
And it would be interesting for the audience to hear about Johnson C. Smith's effort on that front.
We are talking about a financial aid literacy program for parents and students. How do they access the opportunities? How do they prepare to secure the financial aid that they need? How do they make sure that over the 4-year period they are spacing this so that they do not run out of the loans and the opportunities and the grants to finance their education? It is very, very important that we have an in-depth financial aid literacy program, and we enjoy working with banks like M&F and others to help us in this endeavor.
Scott?
And so a question I have is, we look at the changes that are coming down the road in terms of technological changes, globalization, and the changing demographics. I think in terms of being a business leader or in the community or in education, you have to be a visionary of how you're going to respond to the change. Yes. How do you view yourself and the community and your school responding to these changes?
Well, let me describe the seismic shift that is implicit in the changes that you are referring to. By 2020, the majority of students who should be eligible to go to colleges and universities in this country will come from minority groups. For the first time in the history of America, the white American student will be in the minority. Now, if we are not getting them through the pipeline, the educational pipeline, if we are not making education affordable, what you as business leaders will face will be a group of new untouchables, and I'm using Thomas Friedman's language. You will have a minority of students who got it right in terms of technology literacy, global experience, but the majority of people will be outside of that. So you have to ask, how do you run your businesses with just a new group of untouchables when the mass of people are undereducated? That's the concern that keeps me up at night. We've got to come together and address this quickly. We have about 8 years before this window closes.
So in your opinion, how do we solve this? You have some great partnerships with businesses and organizations, Microsoft being probably the most recent one. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, we're delighted. And it's not new. We have had this partnership with Microsoft since 1996. And over the years, it has been a growing partnership to basically help our faculty and our students remain highly literate around the new technologies coming out via software. This very lucrative partnership allows our faculty to have access to all of the software that Microsoft produces, to have access to all of the tutorials, for our students to have the opportunity to benefit from this, as well as for our students to have internships. So we're excited about this because, again, we are able to keep our students on the growing edge when it comes to being technologically literate, but also understanding how that is a facility to be innovators and to be productive worked.
Again, going back to the cost of college education, I think one of the important things that needs to be communicated to our student body is that the gap between someone who has a college degree and someone who doesn't, the pay differential. And even if the person starts with a little college and then drops out, they're more like a high school graduate or a high school dropout in terms of their pay. What are you doing to make sure that once you have students on campus that you retain those students so that they see the completion of the degree?
Well, several things. First, and someone described it as low-hanging fruit. I'm saying it's not even low-hanging, it's just on the ground, it's basic. We have to help students envision themselves within the higher educational arena, on the higher educational landscape. Now, what keeps them from seeing that? What is this shadow, to use T.S. Eliot's language, between the reality and the idea? It's the ability to afford it. If I cannot afford the experience, I can't see myself there. If I do not know how to access the opportunities and the support services, then I will be a non-customer in the sense of the higher educational experience. So we try to connect all the dots at Johnson C. Smith University and make sure that there's a strong safety net for the students to not have to worry about how they are going to afford the experience, how they are going to get on their growing edge. We simply want them to live and learn on their growing edge. It's our responsibilities to make sure that that's in place for them.
Well, I was just going to add, being a product of an HBCU, what Dr. Carter is talking about is the family. You know, the university is your family, and you want each family member to have the same opportunities that your brother or sister had. So I think that's the uniqueness that a Johnson C. Smith brings to the community.
Let's talk about Governor McCrory's comments about aligning higher education with the business and industry needs. You know, we have institutions that do that very well, and we have some institutions that I think are still trying to figure out how we do that in particular disciplines. So what's some of your wisdom and advice on how we can make that better alignment?
Well, the alignment is there.
Okay.
Institutions of higher education have always appreciated the importance of having partnerships with businesses, with corporations, with professional societies. At Johnson C. Smith University, we have the CAP project, which is the Corporate Alliance Partnership with a number of businesses and corporations and professional societies for several reasons. One, we want to make sure that we remain articulate about the needs of businesses in terms of the students we're graduating. So there's a conversation between the professionals in the business world and our faculty. Internship experiences for students so that when they graduate with a rich resume. One of our students did an internship with Microsoft, is now an employee of Microsoft, and came into that experience with a high security rating with the federal government in cybersecurity. All that comes from partnerships. So I think it's there. We have to learn to see it and to communicate it in a rich way.
So let me go back to a comment we were talking about earlier. Is it an economic issue? You know, we talk about funding for programs, recognition of internship opportunities. Some talks on the table have been around tax credits for companies who participate in internship or co-op programs. Is it an economic conversation?
It is an economic issue. It will always be an economic issue because, first of all, we have to understand that an institution of higher education has to be on a very strong business platform. We have to have the revenue and the cash flow to pay faculty, and I'm sure that you want increases in your salary, Scott. You don't want to have a flat salary. We have to keep the lights on. We have to provide transportation. There's just certain basic business processes that must be in place. Then we also have to ask what will be our priorities in the economy if we keep talking about the need for an educated workforce, and we are, 12, 14 ranked in the country, in the world, then we need to invest. We're talking about investments in a very precious commodity that we can see a return on in very dramatic ways, as you've suggested, when you have a college education, what that does for the economy. So yes, it's economics, economics, economics.
We have just a little bit more time left, probably enough for each one of you to ask one more question of Dr. Carter. So Scott?
Yeah, one of the local investment products is the street line, the streetcar. How important do you see that for the community and for your school?
Well, everyone in Charlotte knows that I consider it to be extremely important for a couple of reasons. One, it will connect the east and the west corridors. These corridors are great frontiers for economic development, and we need to invest. Charlotte cannot have a few corridors that are strong and then others that are weak, because we will pull it down as weak links. But it also provides the opportunity for us to connect the institutions of higher education so that we have a visible correlation. No world-class city is without a world-class educational experience. Think of Boston, okay? Well, if we can connect these institutions with that streetcar, Johnson C. Smith University, Johnson & Wales, CPCC, Northeastern University, Wake Forest that is now here, right on out to Queen's University, just think of the impact that can have of a unity of activity potential in higher education. Well, the streetcar can do that. But in the Northwest Corridor, and I can say for the East, we too want to sing the song of Charlotte's economy. We want to see our corridor developing, and we know that when you put tracks down, that will send a signal to investors that this is pretty sure bet. Now, you can change a bus route, but it's not easy to dig up the tracks. So I think we just need to be realistic that if we are going to grow, and if we are going to grow with the new majority, we have to start investing in these communities.
That was such a wonderful answer. I think I'm going to preempt any other questions unless you're just dying to ask another one. This has just been wonderfully insightful for all of us. I'd like to thank you, each of you. James Sampson with M&F Bank, Scott Baier with Clemson University, and Dr. Ron Carter. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful. We know that the economics of higher education impacts our communities in many ways, and we all play a role in that. So we'd like to thank you all for being part of this conversation. And next week, we'll be tuning in with Mayor Fox, Charlotte Mayor, and having a conversation about the economics as they go outside of the walls of Charlotte. So thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health, including Presbyterian in Charlotte and Forsyth in Winston-Salem, are affiliate heart hospitals of the Cleveland Clinic, consistently ranked #1 in the nation for heart care. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, proudly serving South Carolinians since 1946. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.